Why is it so important to learn history? Why is it so important? Why? Why is it so important to learn history? You know, in school, school history is one of the required subjects from elementary, which we call social studies. Back when I was in elementary school, they didn't call it history, they called it social studies, but you're studying history. And in middle school, or we call junior high school, you have to take history. And in college, I don't care what you're going to college for. I don't care if you're going to study to be an underwater basket weaver. You got to take math, English, science, history. There may be a couple other required subjects, but those four, I know history is in there. It is required. It is required. Now, why is it required? Why is it required? Well, it is required because, number one, it is very important. Your history explains your present. If you don't know what has happened in the past, you don't have a good perspective on what is going on today. You're not really equipped to give any very many solutions on the problems of today when you don't understand what has happened in the past and different solutions that has stood the test of time in the past. Yeah, so history is crucial. So they teach history on an individual level for the purpose of understanding identity, and why things have happened and why people are the way they are, different things like that. And then also for the purpose of social order or control. In other words, you'll have, if you don't establish a certain history that is accepted, that is authorized history, okay, authorized type of history, then there are a lot of different versions of history that will come up, and it will cause you to lose a certain stability in the land. Okay, because there's different versions of what has happened and different things like that. So it is very important to come up with a so-called authorized or an established history to be taught. Okay, and basically ingrained in. And all that's fine and well. That's good. That is very good. The problem is the type of history that we have been taught is from a Eurocentric perspective. Perspective is so important. It's not all bad. It's not a bad thing, because if I was a Eurocentric, if I was a European person, then that would be my history. I wouldn't really have any questions about my history on a grand level like I do now, or like many black people do now. Now, they teach a history, but they teach a black history. They teach black history along with history, but it's mainly just to the last 400 years or so, and it's really even in that last 400 years, as far as black people are concerned, They teach about, they may teach about Frederick Douglass and, George Washington Carver and different things like that, and then they teach about certain things. But there are a lot of things that they leave out. We're going to get to that here in a little bit, but history, the proper history, will build a person up, will help to build a person up and give them the dignity that they need to be a well-rounded person, to be a strong person, a strong people, a strong person, strong people. A bunch of strong persons together make a strong people. Okay, so why learn history? The Bible is full of the history of God's chosen people, who are the Hebrews. It's full of the history of the Hebrews, because he always wanted them to know and understand who they are, or who they were, who they are. Their history explained their present. God gave Moses the tedious job of writing down the law, what God had told Moses, of God's instructions to Moses about what he wanted from the Israelites, their covenant, the covenant that God had made through Abraham, the laws and different ways that God expected them to live. And what he did was he established them with different traditions and customs that God set up. All the traditions aren't man-made. Many traditions are set up by God himself. Okay? Praying, talking to God, fasting, offering sacrifices, eating unleavened bread. Different traditions that God set up. Nothing wrong with them at all. But God gave Moses God gave one man that had to be a job. And I'm not really sure where he started compiling the history, because God also gave him the job of documenting the Israelites' history all the way back to Adam. All the way back. Now, this is history. Now, we're talking about history. Okay. And I'm thinking about, I often imagine Moses given that job of documenting the Israelites' history. Moses was in Pharaoh's house. All right. Pharaoh was an Egyptian. Back then, Egyptians didn't call themselves Egyptians. They called themselves Kim, K-E-M, or actually it was K-M-T. That's Kemet. They called their land Kemet, but the word Kim means black, and it was not talking about the land of rich soil that they try to say that Kemet means, black, meaning talking about the soil. That is a bunch of mess. They were talking about themselves. They called themselves Kim, which means black, and they called their land Kemet. Okay. And all the ancient mummies, all of that stuff, everything correlates to them being black African people. Okay. But this is history. So important. So important. A lot of Europeans have a Facebook page called The World's Best Kept Secret. There are a few pages called The World's Best Kept Secret. Mine is the one with the simple black picture and the small white letters that says The World's Best Kept Secret. And it has a lot of information on there about biblical history and period. It's a history page. But Europeans will come on there, and while blacks are being enlightened about history, and Europeans will come on there and they'll be like, I don't see what the big deal is. I don't see what, God loves everybody, and they'll just go spiritual, and, and it's sad because a lot of black people have bought into that mentality. Well, This is black history. All right. Like I said, Europeans, they have history taught to us, so they don't have these questions about history. They can't relate. But black people were only taught a part of, even here in America, they were only taught a part. Like I said, we're going to get into that. But what I was going to say was, Moses was given the job of documenting the history, and he was raised in Pharaoh's house. He was a Hebrew, but he was raised by, God worked it out to where he was raised by his mother, a Hebrew mother, in Pharaoh's house, in the Egyptian's house. So he knew that he understood the ways of he understood a lot of the Egyptian ways, the Egyptian customs, the Egyptian history, the African history. The Hebrews were an African people. Well, they weren't African as in sons of Ham. They were African as in African in complexion. Because when you go back to Ham, Shem, and Japheth, we know there is no doubt among the scholars and theologians and historians that Ham was black. There's no question about Ham's ethnicity. There's questions about the other two, but there's no question about Ham's ethnicity. Shem, they may question. Some say he's Middle Eastern, and some say he was Middle Eastern, olive color or whatever. And then some say, looking at the Bible movies, that okay, well, then they might say that since all the Israelites were white in the Bible movies, and that mean that since the Israelites were descendants of Shem, then Shem had to be white, But then Japheth was supposed to be white. And there's a conversation about the other two brothers of sons of Noah, what color they were, but nobody disagreed. Everybody leaves Ham alone. No other culture wants anything to do with Ham. So just taking a common denominator, a point of agreement that everybody agrees on, that Ham was black. Well, if Ham was black, common sense would tell you brothers would have to be black also. They were family. They were blood brothers. They had the same parents. I know of no people. I've never heard of anybody in scripture or in history who had parents of the same ethnicity and the children were different ethnicities. That makes no sense. Okay, so, and then they say that Ham was the father of the Africans. So that means, obviously, common sense would tell you that if Ham was African, Shem and Japheth had to be African also. And then that would mean that if Ham, Shem, and Japheth were African, then they got whatever they got from their parents. Their parents were African also. Noah and his wife were African. When people say African, they always just think about Ham. But if Ham was African, the ethnicity of one tells you the ethnicity of all of them. Even in the Bible calls Egypt, which is Africa, the land of Ham in Psalm 105 and 106. Old maps call Africa Ham. The continent of Africa was split up by Ham's four sons, Cush, Mizraim, Phut, and Canaan. Canaan, which is Israel, is in the continent of Africa also. Canaan was Ham's son. Canaan is part of Africa. I know they call it the Middle East, but the Middle East is just a region. It's not an eighth continent. There are still only 7 continents in the world. The Middle East is not an eighth continent. The term Middle East was created to describe a travel when they were traveling from England east to China and all that place, and when they go through the Middle East, that was the middle of their journey from Britain and all them places. Okay, but it's a region. It's not an eighth continent. So Israel, whether it's in the Middle East or not, that ain't got nothing to do with the continent. It's in the continent of Africa. It was Canaan. Canaan was Ham's son. All right, that's pretty clear. There's no question about it. Canaan is in the continent of Africa. Canaan Mizraim, which was Egypt, Phut, which is Libya, and Cush, which is Libya. Those 4 countries were the original countries that made up Africa. They weren't the countries that they are now, except for Canaan. Israel is the same, but Egypt was huge, and Ethiopia was huge, and Libya was huge, and the rest of it was, that was all of Africa. Okay, so Africa was made up. So anyway, so Moses knew the traditions, the history of the Egyptians, of Africans. He was an African. They all looked the same. This is why Pharaoh raised him in his house. He looked just like, there was no difference in the way they looked. That's continuous all through the Bible. Joseph was mistaken as a Egyptian by his own brothers. They didn't even know. And even the Apostle Paul in the book of Acts, I think it's the 21st chapter, he's mistaken as an Egyptian. He was a Hebrew. Anyway, it's just all through the Bible. Moses was mistaken as an Egyptian. It's just all through there. All right, but God gave Moses the job of documenting the history. Okay, and he was amongst. I don't know when he started writing, but I do know that he grew up in Pharaoh's house amongst the Egyptians. So he had access to everything that the Egyptians had concerning history. Now, I believe that God set it all up. It's all the hand of God. God is not always working in some kind of spooky way where he just, have to show everything in the vision. That's just not realistic. God uses people. And he does work miracles. But he also uses people. So I believe God used a lot of what Moses already had at available to him. And people try to say that they try to make the point about how Africans used to be and old African ways, and and they try to make that an excuse to be an atheist, and not believe the Bible, in the spirit of going back to doing things the way the original Africans did them. Okay, but my take on it is this: like I said, Moses and the Israelites were living with the Egyptians. They were all Africans, but they were living with the Egyptians. This is why race is not mentioned in the Bible. People always talk about that race not being mentioned in the race is not distinguished in the Bible because they were all black. I mean, it's very clear. It's real hard to try to find somebody in the Bible who's not black. I mean, you can mention the hair. They had locks in the Bible. Locks are dreadlocks. Ezekiel had locks. Samson had locks. In the book of Numbers, the 6th chapter, the 2nd through the 5th verse, is where God told them if they wanted to take the vow of a Nazirite, then you had to let your hair grow into locks. In other words, just don't cut it. Don't comb it, don't cut it, and it will lock up. The only people on earth whose hair would do that naturally. I know every ethnicity can get locks nowadays through different ways to manipulate your hair to do something that it wasn't naturally able to do. It goes against its natural texture. They can manipulate it by, I think, what they call back twisting in all kind of ways, putting all kind of wax and all kind of stuff on your hair to make it do something that it won't do naturally. But if you just don't cut it and don't comb it, there's only one group of people whose hair will naturally lock up. That's people who look like Africans. All right. So Africans were all through the Bible. Well, that whole conversation about black people, disregarding the Bible and all of that, it's like this. The Israelites were in Egypt, and they were exposed to the Egyptian ways, and they rejected. They rejected the Egypt. They were there. They rejected the Egyptian ways. They rejected Kemet. They rejected Kemet's gods. God gave them that. Matter of fact, that's when they really started becoming more sold out and more sound in their faith. You know, God brought them out of Egypt with his mighty hand. But they rejected that. They were there. They seen it in person. We read about it in hieroglyphics and different things like that. We read about Egyptians, ancient Kemet. But they were there. They seen it firsthand, and they rejected it. They rejected Kemet's gods, and they believed in the one God, Yahweh, Yah, the God of Israel, Elohim. Our mighty Savior, wonderful Counselor. So if they had a choice and they rejected, I'm gonna go with them. If they rejected it, and I'm choosing God too. They were all Africans. It's not that the Hebrews were a totally different type of a people from the Africans. No, they were all basically African people. It's just that through Abraham separated. God told Abraham to get away from his people. And who were his people? They were Africans. He told him to get away from them. And God established a covenant. But that covenant was spiritual. It wasn't a natural, it's a spiritual covenant. He was still a natural person. He still had a natural family. But God called him away from everybody. And God, starting with Abraham, established a spiritual covenant that we're still benefiting from today, spiritually. See, the Bible says in 1 Corinthians 15:46 that it was first natural. The natural came first, then the spiritual. So we can't disregard the natural as if it don't matter. The Israelites didn't do that. We have bits and pieces of natural that we built our spiritual on top of. We have bits and pieces of history. But we don't have the whole story. It's not the whole story. And we need the whole story. At least understand what really happened. Okay, so the natural came first, then the spiritual. So God gave Moses that task to write, to document the Israelites' history all the way back to Adam, and it had to be just an amazing job, and that was just awesome. That was just awesome. But going back to why we need to understand history, I'll just say it like this. Since we are naturally a selfish people, let's start with why you need to learn your personal history. Like why you are the way you are as far as an individual person. I'll just use two examples. One is if you were raised by your blood parents, and the other is, like if you were adopted, something like that. If you were raised by your family, in the first example, then you probably have heard your parents or family members say things about your childhood that may explain something that you still notice today. Like, say, for instance, a scar, a burn on your body, some damaged body part, or even, some social or psychological disorder. Why you think a lot, why you, so many things that your history, somebody telling you, when you was little, you was playing outside and, a brick fell on, fell on your foot, and that's why part of your, toe is messed up, or different things like that, and it explains what you see. It explains your present. Your history explains and gives you a much needed clarity of what you are dealing with today. And these are things that a lot of times our parents or our family members might tell us, or even about our parents, different things like that, different things that they went through. If you were adopted, and adoption is a beautiful way of providing a child with a healthy, loving family, that is much needed to live a healthy life, a healthy, secure life. But to children or adults who were adopted, at some point, knowing their history is much more important to them because of the identity questions they may have. Once you start understanding and growing and start understanding, different struggles, then you start wondering, man, I just wonder what my biological mother looked like. Is she still alive? And do I have any brothers or sisters? And all of these things, and then if you meet them, I am not adopted, but I have heard people talk who were adopted, and and I can imagine the questions that are answered and that they didn't even realize were questions, or they had answers to questions that they didn't even have. They just things that they never thought about, and it just brought a lot of things in perspective. When you look up the word perspective, it's like a telescope. So you can see it clear. It makes perfect sense. Perspective. So this is why a history of somebody who's adopted might be very important to them as a person. And some people who are adopted, they may not even have questions. But usually at a certain point in your life, you will get a curiosity of actually who your biological family is or was, are they still alive? And, things start becoming more important the older you get. All right, I'm just kind of scratching the surface and just touching on a few things, and going to the next level would be family history. Why family history is important. Family history explains family traits, like understanding, you have diabetes in your family or different things like that, or even psychological traits, maybe high-tempered, or just different things. Everybody, why your family is short or tall, or just different things that you're seeing today. The history will help you understand why. Why we do some of the things that we do. Why we celebrate things the way our family celebrates them. Why we, do certain things around different holidays, or why we, eat a certain, just all kind of things that your family does, or, you didn't even realize that your family was doing until you look back into the family history and you saw, wow, all of my great uncles wore their mustaches like that, and all of the just different things. It's just amazing, and it just brings it just brings everything into greater perspective, so that you can live your life to be the most effective person that God has created you to be. Where you can do the most with less. That's what perspective does. It causes you to be able to do the most with less, because you see clearly. You have a clear vision. Okay, that's family history. Then we go up into racial history, and this is where we start getting divided because we are so intertwined with the other cultures that our own culture gets put on the back burner for the sake of peace. And that's pretty sad. That's pretty sad. God, like I said, God made sure the Israelites knew who they were. And it's always important for you to understand who you are and who your people are. What they have been through. I mean, it causes a problem. I'll just say it. It does cause a problem when we, with us being intertwined with another culture, and that now, we are, we're trying to be sensitive to their feelings, because we love them, we love them. But it causes a problem with us and the boundaries that we need within ourselves. It causes a problem. And then at some point, you got to make a decision. You have to make that decision at some point. Whether you're going to dig into your true history or whether you're going to keep it on the back burner. You have to make a decision. But as far as the Israelites were concerned, they never separated their history from their worship. It was all one. See, they didn't do like we do. They didn't say history wasn't important. And no, God gave them history. Moses dug it up. So this whole talk about, I don't understand it. I don't understand it. Especially among black Christians. How we will hold a conversation. I will have conversations with black Christians about, different stuff that we're dealing with. Not any angry talk or whatever, just talking about different realities that black people deal with. And we'll have good conversations, But then in church, it's different. That's what I don't understand. Why we don't talk about these things, the same things that we talk about in private, we won't talk about them in church. I don't get it. And I can't do it. For the sake of peace, even Jesus, I can go there. Even Jesus said, he didn't come for peace. He come with a sword. He's going to divide mother-in-law against daughter-in-law. He said that, and your enemies will be that of your own household. I mean, certain things. The truth is divisive, whatever that word is. You know what I'm trying to say. It really is. You have to make a decision. You have to make a decision. Like I said, history is a required subject all through school. That's Eurocentric history. And they go back thousands of years, naming all kinds of victories and defeats, giving a healthy pride and dignity among whoever the history is relating to. You know what I'm saying? So given as an example or as a comparison, American black history only goes back about 400 years when we were brought here as slaves. And quite a bit of that is left out. All we were basically taught about the slaves were how bad they lived and how bad they were treated. Like I said, we're taught about, different people who rose up intelligent, and they gave intelligent speeches, and did great things. I'm not, negating that at all. What we were not taught, like we were taught about the Europeans, were the revolutions and slave revolts that showed that the slaves did fight back. These are things that happened here in America. Like European revolutions taught to us very clear. I mean, they taught to us over and over, all through school. American Revolution, 1775 through 1783. The French Revolution, 1789 through 1799. Even the Russian Revolution in 1917. The English Revolution, 1688, so on and on and on and on. That is history. It's European history, but it is history. Ain't nothing wrong with it. But it is more important that we know and understand our history first. So some of the black history that we were not taught in America, and I'm just going back past 400 years while we were slaves here in America, but our history did not begin in slavery. Okay, that's a whole nother conversation. And I can go there. You listen to some of my other recordings, we definitely go there. But I'm going to deal with the history here in America on this soil in the last 400 years that we have not been taught. There's been a lot of uprisings, and the slaves, all we were basically taught, like I said, was how bad we were treated and how bad we lived, basically. And people who talked about that and against that. But we weren't taught of the actual the black slave revolutions that happened here in America. Well, that sounds strange, don't it? Slave revolutions. See, they didn't call them revolutions. They called them revolts and rebellions, but they were revolutions because a revolution is all about freedom. It is a fight for freedom. All revolutions don't succeed. Okay. And many of the slave revolutions didn't succeed. But you have the New York conspiracy of 1741. That was a big thing in 1741 in New York. Fort George in New York burned to the ground. Fires. I mean, they burnt up the whole city. It happened with some ethnic groups who led that whole revolution were people from Papa, which from a place called Papa on the Slave Coast near Wida, or Uida, which was Judah. There was a city called Judah in Benin, West Africa. They changed the name to Ouida now, Ouidah. But if you look that up, that word Ouida was actually originally it was called Judah. It was called Judah, and ain't that something? Yes, it is. That was Judah. It was called Judah. And there was a kingdom of Judah who on a map in 1747 there was the kingdom of Judah is actually on that map along with a lot of other different kingdoms, but the kingdom of Judah was in Benin, Africa, West Africa, and that's where our people came from. But anyway, that was on the slave coast, and also the Igbo tribe, which were, the ancient, they were Israelites. The slave Equiana, Equiana, can't think of his full name, but he was a slave. He was a slave who came from, I think it was London, and he got his freedom. But he kept a journal. He kept a journal of all his, and he wrote a few, from what I understand, he wrote a few journals. But I brought his name up because he was an Igbo. Okay. Excuse me. And he was convinced that his people were Hebrews. Excuse me. Because they had the same traditions, same customs. I'm talking about history. This is how important history is. And I'll have to interject this while I'm talking about the Hebrews, is that so many people, when they're looking for the what they call the lost tribes of Israel, and they look for them solely based on what religion that they practice. But what people forget, it's interestingly convenient that they forget that God always rebuked the Israelites for serving other gods. He didn't say that they weren't his people. That didn't change their ethnicity. They were just serving other gods. Even when Moses went up to get the 10 Commandments, when he came down, they was kicking. They had built a golden calf right there. All of the Israelites aren't serving the true and living God. They're serving all kind of other gods. Voodooism, Phaisha. I can't think of the name of that. I can't pronounce it right. The name of that religion over in Africa, and there's a lot of different religions that they do. That don't mean that they're not Israelites. Okay, so I'm just saying that to bring that whole perspective. I'm trying to make it clear that when people search for the lost tribes of Israel, you can't say, well, they're not practicing Judaism. Judaism wasn't even the religion of the Israelites. It wasn't Judaism. And this is taking me to another place, but I have to go here for perspective's sake. But the word Jew in the Bible did not refer to Judaism. The word Jew in the Bible, the first time it was used in 2 Kings 16:6. I'll say this on each one of my recordings. The first time it was used in 2 Kings 16:6, it wasn't talking about Judaism. It meant Judah, which was talking about a people. The original word, every time the word Jew is used in the Bible, if you look it up, the original word was Yehuda, which meant Judah, which was talking about a people, not a religion. So it was talking about the tribe of Judah, a people. See, so the word Jew had nothing to do with Judaism. It didn't have nothing to do with a religion. So these people converting to the religion of Judaism today and calling themselves Jews, well, I mean, that's a different type of a Jew that wasn't in the Bible. It's not even really legitimate. They just created that, But I'm saying that because it's not in the Bible. Even in the New Testament, there were Jews and Gentiles. Anybody who converted to being a Jew was called a proselyte. If you converted to doing a religion to the traditions of the Jews, it was called a proselyte. You wasn't called a Jew. You still wasn't called a Jew. They called you a proselyte. Okay, so the whole thing about finding the lost tribes solely based and trying to verify it by the religion that they practice is incorrect. All right, that is incorrect. I'm just gonna leave that right there. I can go on and on about that. So that was the New York that was a New York City conspiracy of 1741. Then we have the Haitian Revolution down in excuse me, down in Haiti, which was originally called Saint-Domingue. Okay, Saint-Domingue is spelled S-A-I-N-T, Saint. It's called D-O-M-I-N-G-U-E, but it's pronounced Saint-Domingue, and it was a French colony, and led by Toussaint Louverture. They had a leader. Anytime that there's any type of movement, has to be led by somebody, a person. This is history. This is why it's so important to understand history. There's just so much. I can't say it all. There's just so much. There's so much here. So Toussaint Louverture, he was a slave. He was born a slave. And make a long story short, the Haitian Revolution, you know, they were slaves over there. They were like 500,000 slaves. They came from Africa. Africa was just dumping the slaves over in, it was called Saint-Domingue. It was the French colony. And Africa, the slave trade was just dumping African slaves over there in Haiti, in Saint-Domingue. And so the Haitians, make a long story short, led by Toussaint Louverture, and then finished by another guy because they captured Toussaint Louverture and you know, took him away. But it was already in process then. The ball was rolling. They had their liberty, and French tried to come back. The Toussaint Louverture, when he first led them through that first revolution, and I know this is not on American soil, but this is important to the black people in America, because this is the only successful slave revolution in history. Only successful one. The other ones I'm going to read, they happened, but they weren't successful either. Most of the time, there was somebody who snitched them out, you know, or they were found out, you know, or they were just over, you know, they weren't planned it out. They didn't plan it out very well. But this one was successful. They ran them slave owners up out of there, and they created a country, and they renamed it Haiti. And in their constitution, they created a constitution that abolished slavery forever. And the purpose for the country of Haiti was, they said in their constitution that anybody who comes to Haiti would be a refuge for anybody fleeing slavery. If they come to Haiti, they would be automatically free. This was in the Constitution of 1807, in Haiti's original Constitution. No, 1804, I'm sorry. 1804. This was in Haiti's original Constitution. All right. So Haiti established that country and caused and declared that its purpose would be a sanctuary, a safe place for anybody fleeing slavery of any culture. But if you were black, then you were automatically, once you set your foot on the soil of Haiti, and they would fight for your freedom. Okay? But once you set your foot on the soil of Haiti, not only were you free, but you were automatically a citizen. Because as a citizen, if you weren't a citizen of Haiti, they said anybody who weren't, if you weren't black, you could not own land there. Okay. So that was the perks of being a citizen of Haiti, and a lot of other things that went with that. So it was a safe house for anybody fleeing slavery, and that was the purpose for Haiti. This is the reason one of the reasons why Haiti is so poor today, because they became a target of the institution of slavery. Institution of slavery was powerful and a lot of money. So they made Haiti pay restitution for the slaves that they lost, and they called it property. So Haiti had to pay hundreds of billions of dollars in today's money back to France for restitution for loss of property, and their property were slaves that the French people said that they lost. And because of that, Haiti had to close down their public school system. They had to close down a lot of things that would have made their country a more vibrant society. So this explains a lot. So if you're just thinking that Haiti is poor just because they're ran by black people and black people can't govern themselves and all this kind of stuff, there's a lot more to it even than what I'm saying. I mean, I can't say everything on this right here. I've got a lot to talk about in this, but you need to research Haiti, Somalia, all those countries, all those black countries that are poor. Look into the whys, why they are poor. I'm telling you, there is a whole nother story in there. There's a whole nother story in there. Okay, so that's the Haitian Revolution, and the Haitian Revolution was that happened right about at the time of the French Revolution, and the French Revolution was actually started because of a conversation about whether they should abolish slavery or not, and that caused a division. That actually caused the revolution. That caused a division in the country. But that was the cause of the French Revolution. So the Haitian Revolution was a spinoff of the French Revolution because Saint-Domingue was a French colony. Okay, so it was part of France. So what was going on in France, what was going on in Saint-Domingue was an extension of what was going on in France. You know, just research that whole thing. I can't talk about it a whole lot. And then you have but here in the United States again, Gabriel Prosser in 1800, who was inspired by the French and Saint-Domingue or Haiti revolutions. He had a revolution in 1800. You know, it failed, but he led a whole bunch of slaves, and you know, it was he was a tall guy, born in about 1776. You know, and they were just determined to be free, and they just started killing white people. You know, and this was the theme of a lot of these slave revolts that happened. But Gabriel Prosser led some. You know, he led this one in 1800. They finally caught him. And he was betrayed by a slave named Pharaoh. And you know, they hung all of Gabriel's people who was with him, and then Gabriel went to the gallows and he was executed alone. They didn't say. I'm assuming he was hung too, but you know, so that was Gabriel Prosser. Denmark Vesey, that was in 1822. He led a slave conspiracy, killing a whole bunch of white people, and he was, you know, he was told on, betrayed. Nat Turner, it was in 1831. He led another slave revolt, killed a bunch of white people, you know, and I believe his was the one who was. Let me make sure. I'm thinking that his was the one that was Nat Turner. He got caught kind of on a fluke. You know, somebody just a white man just happened to stumble upon Nat Turner's hideout and captured him because he had killed a whole bunch of people. I mean, he killed. I mean, they just went through. They went through him and about 70 slaves, they say, and free blacks. They just set out to just start slaughtering white people, and in the early morning hours. Now he was a preacher. A lot of these were preachers, you know. But it was amazing how they got a lot of. The bottom line was they just knew this wasn't right, and they understood that from the Bible, that they had just as much right as the white people did. They were supposed to love everybody, and it just got so bad. So Nat Turner was another slave who led an uprising, but all of them had leaders. And then, even this is something a lot of people don't know, over a dozen slave revolts in Jamaica. And all of them ended with what they call the Great Jamaican Revolution, or the Baptist War, or the Christmas Revolt. This was in 1831 to 1832, led by a man called Samuel. They call him Daddy Sharp. He was a very intelligent Baptist preacher, and he led a revolt. He led a slave revolt and killed a whole bunch of people there, and they finally caught him and hung him, and the place that they hung him today, right now in Jamaica, the place that he was hanged is there's a memorial set up at that place. And they call it Sam Sharp Place or something like that. But it's still recognized to this day. And if you think about it in retrospect, I honestly can't blame the Europeans for not teaching us these things in order to keep control, because they didn't want, now understanding all of this history, it inspires you to fight back. It's history. When you understand, when you start understanding your history and start understanding what has happened, what can happen, how other people have been successful and different things like that, and it gives you inspiration. And they didn't want that, and it causes fear in white people, because all of these slave uprisings was all about killing white people. It's not funny. I'm not laughing. But I'm. What is funny, what is humorous, is the overall picture. Well, it's not funny. There's nothing funny about killing anybody. But there is a point there that it's so amazing that it's okay. It's okay to have an image of black people being killed, but white people, we can't have that, because that's gonna make them afraid. It's just bad. So understand your history. Understand your history. There is nothing unspiritual about knowing history. Your spiritual life should be built on top of history. We always think of, when we talk about racial things, we always think of it from an angry. We usually hear it from angry people. And that's usually why a lot of Christians shy away from it. And it's programmed into us now. You don't even have to be angry. They just shy away from it, because they relate it to a negative spirit, a negative feeling. And it's just information. Like I said, we'll talk about it at home. We'll talk about it in the car. We'll talk about it at the store. We'll talk about it while looking at the news about some police officer that shot a black kid, or shot up, and all of this stuff that is happening. We will discuss it then. But even though the Bible says judgment must begin at the house of God, we will not discuss it at the house of God. And I don't understand. But every fiber in my body is committed to truth. And history is a part of truth. So I'm encouraging everybody to understand your history. We have all these different cultures who know their history, and they have their own culture, own language. They have their own language. Own language. We don't have our own language, and I don't say we can create our own language. I'm not worried about that, but I'm just saying that language, when you see Mexican people talking in Spanish around you and you don't like it because you can't understand what they're saying, all of that, they don't care about that. What's more important to them is the culture that language represents. They will never let that die. We can't relate to that because we only speak English. It's just, there's a lot in there. But that language represents their culture. And their culture, even though they're over here in America, this is not their culture. So they hold their traditions dear. As you see all these Mexican food places, you see Mexican food places, you see Italian food places, you see Greek food places, but you don't see no African food places nowhere. If you do, you're scared of them because of the image that they have produced, that they project because of media, because of society. No African food places anywhere. You may see, you won't even see no Jamaican. And you can go over to Jamaica and eat Jamaican food, but it's not popularized. It's not popularized here. It is not at all. There is a negative stigma that is attached to Africa that we have bought into because we don't know our history. And if time would permit, I would get into the different religions of Africa that have caused people to stigmatize Africa as just being these witch warlock people, and it's just crazy. It's crazy. It's crazy. If you look up, if you even Google, if you Google the word African religion, you're going to come up with all kind of these voodoo and witch, warlock, and even your understanding of voodoo is not even, understanding these different religions, the problem, listen, I'm a sold out Christian. I ain't thirsty for nothing else, okay? I'm not thirsty for nothing else. I'm loving this life. But the problem that I have is that Jesus said, as you would men to do to you, you do to them likewise. So don't treat nobody the way you don't want to be treated. So if you wouldn't want nobody to stigmatize you like that, don't stigmatize nobody else like that. It's not right. Now, the thing is, African people they are intelligent people. They are intelligent people. So the things that they do them for a specific reasons. And when you get into them, it makes sense. Don't mean that I agree with them, but I understand them. They make sense. They're not just some crazy, stuff that we see on TV, witch doctors and all that kind of goofy stuff. Like half animal stuff that don't make no sense. And that irritates me. It make me itch. It ain't right. It's not real. But we don't know no better because all we know is what we've been taught. This is why I'm encouraging us to write our own book. All we know is what we have been taught. We haven't wrote our own book. We are the only people on earth who haven't wrote our own book, who haven't wrote our own story. All we have is a story that's been taught to us. And that causes us to raise an eyebrow at anything that is different than what we've been taught in school. Like I said earlier, they only taught us Eurocentric history. So anything that doesn't agree with what we have been taught, we raise an eyebrow at it. I'm not saying everything that we have been taught is wrong. Or is it? Or is it? I mean, no, think about it though. I mean, if we haven't been taught the whole truth, well, then is half of the truth still truth? I'm going to leave you with that one. All right. God bless you. Peace.